My name is Leo. You might know me from the other room 5 minutes ago. And again, this is an amazing event. This year, our focus was on having more community involvement. That's why you're seeing all the meetup groups around the edges, and go talk to them. We're trying to get everyone a part of it. So I'll be short because this is way better than what I have to say. I want to thank two of our main sponsors, Adobe and Factor. And real quick, we're going to have Bram come up, say something about Factor.
Hi, I'm Bram Wessel. I am the co-founder of Factor. I should put this down so I don't spill it. And we're an information architecture firm, so if you have really difficult information problems, give us a call. I also want to say something about an event that's coming up in a year that I've been working with a bunch of people on. Interaction 19, the International IXDA Conference, is going to be in Seattle in February of next year. It'll be about 2 weeks before Convey, which is great because we might be able to have people come to both conferences. And if you want more information about this, like to sign up for an email newsletter or maybe to buy tickets, the early bird tickets are on sale right now at a discount. Go to the IXDA table in the other room and talk to those folks about that. So thank you.
All right, so one last thing. We have a raffle, and I tricked all these people that are giving us free stuff. So we have 2 sketch licenses, 2 OmniGraffle Pro licenses. The grand prize is a year of Creative Cloud, a class by SVC, and 3 books. So we'll do that after. But now, it's the show, so thank you for coming.
Great, thank you. Well, it's great to be here. I'm Corey Lebson. I will be moderating our panel discussion about the evolution of UX careers. And we've got all sorts of perspectives, of thoughts, of kind of lenses that we're coming from. But before we do that, we're each going to go and introduce ourselves for a moment, kind of talk about what we've seen, what all of us have seen over the years. As our own careers have progressed, what we've seen in the field. Like I said, I'm Corey Lebson. I've been a lifetime user researcher, consultant for 20 plus years, and I've seen a lot change. I've seen when I started in the field, it was something that no one had ever heard of. It wasn't UX either. It was somewhere between human factors and usability. What I'm doing now. I started in 1994 was my first full-time job. The world changed. I felt like as I was spinning around, I was here, the world was kind of spinning around. UX was evolving into this real profession, which was amazing to see. I then wrote a book called The UX Careers Handbook about that. Basically that's who I am. That's kind of where I started. But we're going to go now and just kind of go right down, starting with Jeff over here.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jeff Harrison. I'm the head of UX design at Blink UX here in Seattle. And I started my career with a graphic design degree and also sort of a media arts background. I was interested in newspapers and TV, and thought that what I wanted to get into was television graphics. That was the big, that was going to be my ticket. And so I started working for a video company. And that video company started a division doing multimedia. And I'm about Corey's age. It's about 94, 95. And we were doing things like CD-ROMs and things that you guys probably don't know much about or have ever heard of. But David, I got it in. These were interactive computer programs, and we were doing a lot of training and marketing for companies. And that was really the start. But for me, I felt like a lot of the companies that we were talking to and helping were designing software, and we were doing the marketing for them. And I was really interested in learning more about how to develop products. And so I went to the UW in 2002 in the HCD program, and there's probably some of you guys involved in that, to learn more about that, and went out on my own and started some consulting, got a consulting gig out at Microsoft, and started to get enough inquiry where I started a little small business, and I had about 5 people eventually in that business, and we were doing prototyping, some demo work, and I ended up merging that in. It was complementary. I started doing some work for Karen and Kelly at Blink, and started talking about merging those 2 things together, and we did, and that's how I kind of ended up here. So I've always been on sort of the services side, but sort of gives you an indication of sort of starting with, at that time, a different type of degree, and then building that up into UX and really learning about it as I went.
I'm Tamara Adlin. Nice to meet you. I beat you because I was getting my master's at UW when it was TC, Technical Communication. Yeah, it is before you. 94 to 96. Before that, I did an independent major because my mom is a psychologist and my dad was an artist, and so I was like, well, I guess I have to do both, being their child. And then ended up accidentally discovering when I went to I visited the industrial design department at UW, and they said, you're one of those weird technical communication people. And I said, what's technical communication? Went over and talked to Jan Spiridakis, which itself is an experience, and ended up at that department. Then did a bunch of startups, then was at Amazon, then ran Screaming from Amazon in 2005, and have been doing independent consulting ever since. And I loved Amazon. I loved leaving Amazon. And I am particularly interested in personas and in process and in executive alignment. And what I can add to this conversation is that when I first got my degree, people were looking for usability professionals, usability testers. And everybody wanted usability testers with 5 to 10 years of experience, which did not exist. And there was like one job. And there were like, there were like 4 jobs, and there was like 1 person for the job, right? And you fast forward to now, and now everybody wants all of these different job titles, right? And there's still not enough people to fill them. And now you're going to see like VR UI design with 10 years of experience, which also doesn't exist. So my fascination is in organizational process and how that gets in the way or supports interaction design. Part of that organizational process is, where does UX sit in the organization? Is UX senior enough in the organization? And as we know, UX swims upstream from year to year to year, going from usability testing, is the baby cute? No, the baby is cute. There's nothing we can do about it. Send the baby. All the way back up to where we are now, which is impacting strategy and potentially getting into positions like the chief experience officer. That fascinates me. And one other thing I'll say is, I got really interested in this whole question of where did the field come from many years ago, and created a set of interviews, one of which was with Peter Morville, who you may not even remember, on uxpioneers.com, because everybody who started this field that we're in, most of them are still alive, most of them are still practicing, and all of them are weird in really fascinating ways. Their careers make sense as a straight line looking back on them, but they all came from totally diverse places and got fascinated by something that became our field. So you are here for the birth of it, and you're going to be here as it explodes and explodes and explodes, so congratulations to you.
Well, hello, I'm Peter Morville, and I'm not entirely convinced that I have a UX career, but I'll tell you my story anyway. So I went, I'll go all the way back to college. So in college, I was an English major. I had some vague idea that after I graduated, I would move out to California and get a job in management. I have no idea what that meant. It didn't happen. So I graduated from college and lived with my parents, and hated it. And I was searching for a career. And so every week I would go to the library and I would look through, do career research, and I would come home and I would tell my parents, like, I've decided to become a hospital administrator. And they would just laugh at me, and I'd say, okay, let's try something else. Well, so one day, I still remember walking through the library and noticing this little book on the shelf that was called Careers in Library Science. And it had never occurred to me that there were careers in library science. But I looked at the book, and it was quite interesting. It sort of talked about organizing information. And at the same time, this is back in the early 90s, I was getting interested in the early online computer networks, America Online and CompuServe and Prodigy. And I had this sort of light bulb kind of moment of just thinking there was some connection between organizing information in physical libraries and what needed to happen to organize these messy digital places. And that was why I went to library school, 92 to 93 at the University of Michigan. And that's where I fell in love with the internet. And when I graduated from that program, there were no jobs doing what I wanted to do. And so I allowed Lou Rosenfeld and Joe Janes, who's now on the faculty at the University of Washington, they convinced me to kind of join their little part-time company called Argus Associates. And we started out doing internet training, but pretty quickly we moved to web design, and then we realized that we should be specializing in what we really know, which is the organization part of that. And so we eventually started calling that information architecture, and we sort of grew our company and wrote the Polar Bear book on the subject. And really, so since the mid-90s, I've been doing information architecture consulting. And we can get into debates on whether information architecture is part of user experience or vice versa, or whether it's all part of design. But that's sort of my, I guess, my story. So.
And I'll throw in there that the umbrella, whatever that umbrella is, whether it's UX or otherwise or IA, it keeps changing. It's the same stuff. It's always the same stuff, but that umbrella always keeps changing. Pamela.
Yeah, so true. Well, yeah, so I got in it like all these other people up here. I was studying Russian, so obviously the next choice was, after I spent a lot of time traveling and got a lot of, free time in Prague and stuff like that, I decided, well, this has to end. I have to get a job sometime. So I thought, well, what about the internet? And at the time when I got into it, I thought, this is really about like art and fun, and how could anyone make money on this thing? This is back like around late 90s, 2000. But I was fascinated by it, and I think what I carried over is my interest in people and in research, and that's my specialty now, is understanding the relationship people have with technology. And I followed that through from the early 2000s to now, and it continues to evolve. As we design technology, it designs us, and that affects this really interesting change and really interesting relationship that I think makes for continued excitement for our field.
Thanks, Dan.
That's it. I'm Bree.
Hi, I'm Dan Brown. I will not tell you my origin story because it is irrelevant. What I will tell you is I run a boutique design firm in the Washington, D.C. area, or as you might call it, the other Washington. And we're relatively small, and what's interesting is that the design problems are getting harder, right? So small teams are still relevant. What I will reflect on is what hasn't changed in the 20 years that I've been doing this, and that is the sense of community. Now, 15 years ago, when the first UX design conferences were emerging, if we filled a room like this, it would have been amazing, right? And now we can do that in one city. One city's community can fill a room like this. So the thing has gotten a lot bigger, a lot bigger. I met all of these people at one time or another throughout my career, and it's hard to meet everyone in UX these days because it's so big. But what I don't want lost is the sense of community. I always felt like I belonged, right? Whenever I would go to a conference or to a meetup in DC or whatever it is, there was a sense of we're all in this together. And I feel like that sense of community, despite our size, hasn't changed over time and is crucial for career development. I think one of the more interesting things that has changed is, again, all the folks up here, we were kind of making it up as we went along. There was no classes, there was no schools, there was not a whole lot of educational infrastructure. to help us understand what it is that we're doing. And now there's a lot of that, right? But what I see with the young designers that I hire and that I mentor is that they don't have a lot of context for the things that they do. So they come out of school knowing how to do a usability test, but they can't answer questions about why and when I should apply it. So I think that's something that we should talk about and maybe think about is how these things have changed in the fact that the techniques are more readily available, but the experience is not so much.
And I'll echo what you said about community too. It's always amazing to me that when I'll travel a lot and go to a lot of different cities for research. When I do, if there's a meetup or if there's an event, I could just go there, show up, and people will be very welcoming and say, oh, you do UX too. What kind of UX do you do? And you can go and just look up on LinkedIn and say, hey, who's in the city? There's some stuff going on. Say, oh, this person looks interesting. Hey, you want to meet for coffee? Say, sure, why not? And I don't know what other professions it can be like that, where really anywhere you go, you find UX people, and you're part of the same community. It's amazing. Okay, so with that, we're going to divide the remaining time into two primary things. One, I've got a few questions, that we'll kind of start talking about, let you know kind of where we're all coming from. And then the second thing we'll do for the remaining half of the time that we have left is we'll just open it up to you guys and say, what do you want to know? What's interesting to you? So before we start talking, though, we want to kind of take a pulse of kind of where you're coming from, what perspectives you have, what lens you have. So I've got a couple show of hands kind of questions that will help us better know what to say. So the first question is, how many of you are interested in UX as a career but haven't actually started a UX career yet? Okay. Okay, next question. How many of you are just starting a UX career right now? Okay. How many of you have been in UX for a while? Okay. How many of you have been in what's now known as UX for a really long time? Okay. And finally, how many of you are a UX manager of products, projects, or people? A few. Okay. So actually what's interesting here is I think we have the gamut. I think we have everybody. So awesome. Okay. So with that said, we're going to start by talking about UX passion. And as the panelists have introduced themselves, they talked a little bit about the passion that they had, the areas that they found most exciting. But my next question for the panel is very directly, what is your UX passion? And I'll tell you my UX passion, besides the community thing, is UX research, user research, usability, ethnography, all the kinds of research, interviews, focus groups, whatever it is, qualitative research, but not just any qualitative research, but the stuff that's as unstructured as possible, that is as kind of you never know what's going to happen kind of research. There's not a definitive script that you necessarily need to follow. For me, that's the most exciting kind of UX work that I do. So why don't we actually start with Dan this time, and we'll move the other direction, but everyone can feel free to jump in and add as you go.
I need the 20 minutes to think of my answer. Okay. Let's put on the spot here. What I write about and what I think about and what I talk about is the dirty underbelly of design, which is how do we all get along, right? How do we do this effectively? The problems are getting harder, not easier. This is not a 5-page marketing website we're building anymore. These are complicated applications that become the centerpiece of our users' lives, our working lives. So those are hard problems. And in order to do them well, we need to work really well together. So what I get excited about is not so much a particular technique or a particular type of design problem, but how do we work together effectively? And this involves a lot of very topical issues like inclusive design and ethics, right? At the same time of thinking about how do we make our products accessible and meaningful to our users and mindful of who they are, we also need to think about how do we be inclusive in the design process itself? How do we get more perspectives to the table? How do we make sure those perspectives are heard? And how do we do so in a way that's effective and efficient? So I've written books on documentation, right? What artifacts do we create to communicate effectively? But I also like thinking about collaboration and dealing with conflict. How do we put a whole bunch of people with lots of different perspectives together in a room and make sure they don't kill each other, or at least kill the product that they're working on? Does that answer? Was that good?
That's a real downer, Dan. No.
That's why I started with me, because I start low, and you guys can just bring it up.
I'd say for me, it's our emotional relationship with technology. So a lot of the work I do, I run a small consulting agency, and we focus on future insights. So almost all my projects have the preface, the future of something, and we're helping companies develop ways to think, not just problem solve a discrete problem that we've identified for the next, say, couple months, or fixing things that we broke in the first place. That's kind of where we're at with technology right now in a lot of ways. But instead thinking 2 years out, 5 years out, 10 years out, and looking at techniques to explore that kind of relationship. And I guess my second fascination is emotion. I mean, a lot of the research I do is around that emotional connection that we have, how our feelings about technology are changing, how the feelings that we feel ourselves are being shaped by technology, how those relationships and attachments that we have with technology are going to change over time. And yes, I'm talking about sex robots and other things too. And all of that stuff, because that's coming. Artificial intelligence. It's funny because we did this workshop this morning about design for well-being, and one of our questions that we started off with is, what makes humans human? And about, I don't know, 5 or more people put up Post-its that said empathy. And that got me to thinking, because we think that we humans have a lock on that, but in fact, artificial intelligence is increasingly going to be designed to understand those kinds of things. And when it comes to certain emotional markers, like tone of voice, for instance, might be better than us at that. And this is a weird, interesting, strange place, but maybe not so scary, because technology is always changing us. So those are some of the things that I'm kind of thinking about right now.
I feel like my passion in this space has shifted in the course of my career, from the early days of the Polar Bear book on information architecture and ambient findability, where my passion was definitely designing for findability, right? Designing systems so people could find what they need. And then I sort of shifted into thinking a little bit more about designing for understanding, both sort of helping users to understand, where am I and what have I found and what can I do, but also starting to think a little bit more about how do we help our clients understand what's possible. And that's sort of led me to my last couple of books, Intertwingled, and then just fresh off the presses in the last few weeks, Planning for Everything. And those books are actually more about how do we change culture and governance, because I believe that everything is connected from code to culture, right? The work that we do is either enabled or limited by culture and governance, and so we need to be thinking about the relationships there. And my most recent book, Planning for Everything, is a little bit more about how do we change ourselves, right? How do we how can we be more mindful of the ways that we plan and organize the future? How can we be more mindful of our own habits and assumptions, beliefs, and really sort of create more of an opportunity for change? So again, you can sort of question whether or not that's user experience, but that's kind of where my my kind of interest has sort of led me over time.
First of all, I'm not sure it's clear to all of you youngins in the room, but this is where the word information architecture came from. This head, this shiny head right here.
And it just had a big anniversary, too.
Yeah, it
right?
just, yeah.
20 years.
20 years. Yep. He invented your job title. That's pretty bizarre. So I've got two things I'm passionate about, the thing I love thinking about at work and the thing that makes me so spitting mad that I'm sort of cardiovascularly passionate about. The thing that I love thinking about at work, he's the dirty underbelly, I'm the corporate underpants. And as my friend Ashby rewrote my sentence for me today, corporate underpants, when your org structure shows through your product like bunched up panties ruining the entire outfit. Which is just a nicer way of saying that, which is I think that the biggest user experience challenge we have is the organizational problem of lack of focus and clarity from the top, and that we have a responsibility as user experience professionals to also be a usable product to our internal colleagues. It is our job to help develop the clarity and focus from the top, not to whine about it not being there, because guess what? It isn't there, and business goals don't exist, and therefore it's your job to find them or write them yourself. That's where my passion lies. Thank you. I'm here all evening, ladies and gentlemen. And a lot of my work, my most recent work, just got published for this conference, which was hellish, but thank you, I guess, on alignmentpersonas.com, which is about really trying to identify business goals and then creating what look like personas but have no data in them to align your executive team. Thank you again. And the thing that makes me spitting mad passionate that I think about and then go absolutely nutso bonkers over is salaries and job titles, especially for women, but not just for women. And the way that I'm handling my spitting mad passion about that is by trying to create some very usable, easy to follow guidelines. Like you only have to be brave for 10 seconds, because all you have to do is say what you want and then shut the fuck up. And then it's their job to respond. So there's one of them, and there's a bunch of other little things like that. But I think it's all of our responsibility to know where we are. He asked you, where are you in your career? And you saw all the hands. If you are a hand that got raised after the first set of hands, meaning you are beyond just thinking about getting in the career, it is your responsibility to negotiate for title and salary because those people are coming up behind you and you can't have their titles and their salaries. So that's what makes me like, and I'm going to stop because I'm going to start getting really upset.
You want to keep going?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, it doesn't have to go to me. You're more entertaining, I think. I think I'm really passionate about bringing teams together to solve problems. And I think it sort of echoes what Dan is talking about, Peter, and a little bit, Tamara, what you're talking about. So when we're talking to companies and putting together plans for them, one of the things I always talk to them about is that when you're hiring a company to come help you do this, we're going to become a part of your team. And you're going to have to participate in this. And not just you, the product manager, but your executive team, on up to your CEO. We're going to be developing a product for your company that's going to impact how your company operates, potentially impact your customers. Everyone has to be involved. And I think I'm really passionate about trying to bring together teams and meet organizations where they are as well. Some organizations aren't fully ready for that, and that comes down to not having business goals, and we'll help you achieve those. But I think it's really important too that bringing people together in this profession is what it's all about. There's not black box solutions. There's different perspectives. We need to be thinking about things like inclusion and accessibility. But to me, that's all about bringing people together, and I get really passionate about, developing teams, not just within my organization, but as we're doing projects with others, bringing them into it as well, and bringing as many people and thinking about how we do that. And a lot of what we'll think about is developing core teams and then circles around that that are going to be influenced by what we do, and how we communicate what we're doing out to different layers of the organization. And I think that's really important. I think it's important, as you start thinking about careers and how you can have influence in organizations. We're sort of talking about that up here on the panel, how these, UX is having more and more influence in organizations. Tamara, you mentioned that. And I think that's absolutely true, but it's about bringing people together to solve problems.
Can I say one more thing about some of the stuff we talked about in advance?
Of course you can.
Thank you. Can you stop me? No. So when we had we had pre-meetings about this, which I really appreciate, the pre-meetings about panels, because I really appreciate when a panel leader takes the time to organize and arrange the panel in advance, which doesn't always happen, which is why most panels suck, and this one does not. But what we talked about originally in the panel and why we're talking about this passion topic is because we were discussing how with this explosion of our industry and of our job titles, and with this explosion of ways to learn the basics, how to do a usability test, maybe how to do a card sort. A lot of you get training and stuff, right? And then you come and interview. And here's what we want to, I think all of us to encourage you to do. Something Dan did in his workshop today. He asked people to put down their favorite methods for several things, right? And he said, well, there's your fallback, your favorite things. You really need to think about what it is you love doing. One of the best interview questions I ever heard was from Corinne, who I work with. And she asked, and it's so basic, like the best stuff in UX, what's your favorite kind of project? I'm like, oh my God, that's so good, right? And then these people who we were interviewing who sounded, here's the project, they're like, oh my God, I really love to do X. I really love to do stuff that's really, really hard. I really love to do stuff that all of the infrastructure has been done, and I get to really make it beautiful and brand relevant on the top. Or I really like to get in there, and it's not so much about brand as it is about the user experience of this blue versus that blue. And all of a sudden, we knew who they were. So part of your development for yourself is figure out where your passions are. Figuring out the stuff you love the most, right? And develop yourself in it, and be willing to say, I know you're looking for a usability tester, but here's where my passion lies and how that's related. And follow through with that, because skills are going to become more and more a commodity. But the passion that brings all of us to this field in this early stage is still there. So find that thing that's really freaking cool and you can really love doing. Know what that is. And that's one of your biggest career pieces of advice that we can give you, is know what you love to do.
Here's the other thing that's going to happen throughout your careers. You're going to hear the distinction between generalist and specialist at least 3 or 4 times before you retire. You're going to hear T-shaped designers. Have you heard that phrase, T-shaped designers? This is where you can maybe do a lot of things, but then you can go deep on one thing in particular. You're going to hear, you know what, you're a designer, but you should really learn how to code. Oh, God. Right? You're going to hear all of this stuff that says you're a designer, but that's not good enough. And I think that sucks. And I think it sucks because it changes. It's changed many times since we've been doing this, right? Which means it's going to keep, we're not going to land on, oh, it's not T-shaped, it's S-shaped, or whatever it is, right? We're not going to come to a conclusion about this. But when you know what you love to do, you can play to your strengths. And I feel like that is a far more interesting shape for a designer, for someone in our field, than anything else. You can say, all right, I get that I need to learn how to do this hard structural IA stuff, but I'm going to play to my strengths. I know that that's my foundation and that's my starting point. Because once you have a good handle on that, you can imposter syndrome the rest of it, right? You can sort of say, all right, the rest of it is not something I'm great at, but at least I know I'm not great at that, and I know I can make choices about how I want to grow.
Well, so, and I'd even throw one more thing. So as a, like I said, a lifetime user researcher, what I hear is, so you're a designer. I'm like, oh, you do UX, you're a designer. So you don't even actually have to be a designer. You can do any kind of UX you want, and there's all kinds of UX out there, and you can specialize, generalize, T-shape, broken comb, whatever you wanna do, broken comb, you have strengths, strength like the comb, but you have weaknesses. But you can do any part of it. You can do anything you want. I also want to throw one thing, kind of backing up a little bit. One thing I heard when everybody talked about their passion was, well, we know UX is about people, and people were part of every passion. Whether the people were the teams, the passion was the people, the teams, the conversations, the interactions, which is awesome, and I think actually ties back, as I think about it, to UX careers. I mean, it's the passion about the people in some way or other, some way, shape, or form. So with that, actually, I want to talk a little bit about what kinds of skills, what kinds of experiences. I think we mentioned the idea that it's not just the skills you have. It's not just those skills. It's not just those, but it's really the experiences as well. So open, no orders. You don't have to start with any of you. What do you think in the future the most important skills and experiences might be for UX careers, such that people who are either just starting out or doing UX now will continue to find work by having those skills and experiences?
I'll take a stab at that with a quick answer. So I feel that one skill that's incredibly valuable and is still rare is synthesis, right? Is the ability to learn from all sorts of different data sources by doing user research, looking at analytics, talking with stakeholders, looking at content, what have you, taking in information from all of these different research methods and sources, and then figuring out what to do with that, right? It's the sort of the black box kind of in your head, the synthesis, and having the courage to come up with something that's not obvious, that nobody's expecting, and to push it, right? To sort of say, I think this is the right way. And that's where some of this sort of notion of changing culture comes in, because sometimes you need to have the courage to get outside of the sort of the box that your organization is in and push a new direction. So I guess I'll just stop there with that.
Yeah, I've got something to add to that. I think building on that, I would encourage you to question everything. So you're coming into this at a point where things are formulated. As Dan said, you can learn how to do usability testing. Thanks to Peter, you can learn about information architecture. It seems like we've got all these methods that have, sort of become a thing that you can just use and rely on. And the fact is that the landscape is changing. The way we're using technology is changing. The way that it's becoming a part of our lives is changing. The technology itself is changing. And we need to start rethinking our methods. For instance, most of our methods start with an individual, and an individual who is a certain kind of individual and has money to pay or time to spend would be one example. We're used to thinking about our core value as ease and efficiency and productivity. We haven't really thought much beyond that. And I think what I'm looking for in students at Pratt and among my own employees, and what I see my clients looking for, are people that can question that status quo and say, okay, we need a new way to think about this, and we need a new approach. And yes, we've learned a lot through design sprints or usability testing, but it's time to stretch ourselves. And don't be afraid to try new things and to question these methods that are presented to you as fact. That's it, we're done here. Bye, everyone.
Tamara's pointing at me, so I have to go. This is gonna sound really boring, but it's really important to me. I want you to get great at writing. And I know that sounds ridiculous after these two sort of introspective answers, but there's not a day, as a UX designer, whatever you specialize in, there's not a day that goes by that you are not trying to put two words next to each other in a way that makes sense. And I've published 3 books, countless blog posts. I'm definitely in middle age, and I still feel like this is something I want to be working on for the rest of my life. Because what makes a great writer is the same thing that makes a great UX person, right? Someone who's sensitive to the needs of their audience, someone who can construct an experience, whether it be in prose or in a digital product, right? All of these things are really important. You need to communicate not just with your users, but with other designers on the team, or developers on the team, or product owners, or the people who have the money to pay you and to build the products that you want to build, right? All of that entails writing. And so I think, and I'll say one other thing about it, is my business partner and I don't do a ton of marketing for my company, 8 Shapes. But what we do is we write a shitload of articles, right? And we put those articles out there. And the only reason why I'm up on this panel is because I put a lot of stuff into the community. Nathan puts a lot of stuff into the community, and that's appreciated. And I think if you have that kind of voice in the community, that helps you stand out. I am sick of articles. Again, I'm getting angry. But I'm sick of these articles.
Bring it down, Dan.
That kind of, I'm tired. And so my New Yorker is coming out, right? So I feel like there are a lot of articles that are just sort of rehashing a lot of the old techniques that we use. And by getting to be great at writing, you elevate the practice, you elevate user experience, because you can think more deeply about the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I so totally agree with you. And actually, I'd even throw in there also that, whether it's on Medium or LinkedIn Pulse or whatever you want, writing isn't just about work either. I mean, you can just write your own blog post so easily on your WordPress site or whatever you want. And that does get you out there. Probably more, potentially more than anything else is the words that you put out there. So for sure, that's a great.
And to keep going with writing, it's not just talking about the profession, but how we articulate ideas within organizations. So when we're doing research, talking about, talking to executive teams, how we present themes, how we connect what we're seeing in users or certain communities to how we're going to put that in the product is really important. And I think it all comes down to writing. I've got at Blink, a staff of 25, let's say, practitioners there, and varying levels. There's some people that do this really well, and we talk about it a lot in our groups. About looking at how we present things and how we think about things sort of thematically. But I love that, Dan. I think it comes down to writing. It comes down to how you frame things and can talk about them. So it's not just the outward community stuff, but it's in the work as well.
So for writing, 2 practical things that you can think, because I've just been writing my nose off. 2 things that have been life-changing for me for writing. If you don't know about it already, there is and if you want to write longer form things, like things with chapters, or maybe you want to organize a series of blog posts, look up a piece of software called Scrivener, Scrivener. I have no vested interest in you purchasing this, except it has been life-changing for me. And it's much better set up to help you write long form than Word, for example, or Pages. And the other thing, if you are not feeling super confident about your writing skills, Hemingway app is a free app online, and you can just type in Hemingway app and search for it, and you put in whatever you've written, and it highlights things that are where sentences are too complex or could be simplified or whatever. It can be a little constraining in terms of creative, crazy writing, but it's flippin' awesome. And writing has nothing to do with what I want to talk about. I mean, I think we are all translators, and writing is a key way of translating. It's a universal language in business, and I think it's absolutely important to be able to write. The place that I would say people have to build a skill is in speaking business. in the world of product design, everything flexes and changes so much that I have a strong craving to find the one thing that doesn't move, right? And there's only one thing that could possibly be an immovable object in the world of product design, and that could be the measurable business goals. Either you have to increase something by 20% before January 1st, or you do not. Or it's 30% by February, or something that the business leads have decided equals success. If we get to this time period and this number is this, with respect to this important thing, then we have succeeded. We need to learn how to help people get to clarity on that. And I think that also means, like I said before, learning how to be more usable to our colleagues, and instead of complaining about things, try to fix things from the inside using all the skills that we have. But I'm repeating myself.
And actually, you know what? As I see people progress in their careers, it is the people who get business and understand the value and can communicate and interpret.
Yeah, because all these methods are great. All of these designs are great. All of these theories are great. But if the business doesn't make any money, you got to find another job, no matter how creative your design is, right?
Sure.
So it doesn't constrain you to know where the fences are. It just lets you grow in a field that has fences around it.
Yep. For sure. So we have 20 minutes left. In the last 20 minutes, I actually would like to let you guys have the opportunity to ask questions about UX careers, future of UX careers, your UX career. So here's your opportunity. So so I'll start this way. Yeah, you.
Kiara, so fences. What is your favorite, like if you're in a rut or if you're kind of as a blocker, what kind of fence gets you going as far as like getting over that block?
If I'm at a blocker, it's not necessarily a fence thing, but I do have a rule of thumb. With my workshops, for example, every step is easy if you did the one before. I find, we just talked about this today, like if you are at a place where you are between a rock and a hard place, back up one step. That's what gets me out of it. In this case, it was like there was this communication, who's doing what kerfuffle, and it seemed like a design problem, and it was solved by drawing an org chart. Stepped back a level, stepped up a level, stepped back. That's what I do. If something is driving me crazy, I back up one step. Because something's wrong there, inevitably.
Yeah.
So as we move into a reality of VR being more of a reality, we'll have multiple realities. This is kind of a question about where you see the design field going. How do you envision the offices of the future in this environment? The challenge is a lot of what we do relates to directly talking with people, but then again, we're also seeing a trend towards more consulting work and remote work. So where do you see that?
Yeah, so here, why don't I give you the mic? How's that? There's several parts to that question. So.
As we move into a world where virtual reality is one of our realities, where do you see the offices of the future and design teams going?
I'll take that one. I think that it's probably not going to change that much in some ways. Already, there's a screen between us, no matter if we're face to face or we're in different rooms or in different cities. That experience that we have of each other is already mediated, and it might bring it to a different level, but we're completely defined and entangled and mixed up and meshed with technology at this point, and I don't really see VR having a huge change on that. I think it will just be a gradual evolution, and I don't think it will be like overnight we're switching to VR either. So I think that will have, some of the same impacts that we see when we're dealing with somebody on Slack or on Skype, or even when we're face to face and we're still not really connecting.
There's a bunch of studies about this. You don't have the same neurotransmitter response when you read a text or even talk to someone on Skype as you do when you interact with people in person. For example, my anxiety level is very high right now because I'm in the same room as all of you. I'm just kidding. My company, 8ships, has been remote since 2006, before it was cool to be remote. And Nathan and I started the company that way because, and this will only be meaningful to you if you're familiar with the Washington, D.C. area. He lived in Fairfax, Virginia, and I live in Bethesda, Maryland. And we might as well live on opposite coasts, right? There's just one river dividing us, but it seems like it's the biggest river in the world. So we started the company as remote, and we've been that way for 12 years now. And I feel like remote work is often a red herring for a lot of the organizational and communication problems that are inherent in organizations, whether you're there in person or not. I agree with Pamela. I don't think anything's going to change because sometimes you just have to sit next to someone to get the work done. I think what we need to be good at is being sensitive to knowing when should we do that and when can we work remotely, right? Being experienced and deliberate about how we make those calls.
Ever since I've been doing this sort of work, since the early to mid 90s, there have been a number of things that have been the future: artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and there is progress that's made in these areas. And I don't mean to be a total skeptic, you know. But what we do need to do, those of us who are in this field, part of our job is to try to predict the future, right? Like, we are always, we are exposed to all of these trends and hype around certain technologies, and in many different ways, we need to try to make sense of that. And I'll just give one brief example of this isn't specific to VR, but I was working with a big e-commerce company last year, and they sort of drove me crazy. So I'm gonna get to vent for a second here. We'll go back to that passion thing. One thing that drives me crazy is folks who call themselves user experience professionals who don't care that much about the end user, who don't really have empathy for the end user. So in this organization, my sense was that there were two things missing. One was really having empathy for the user, right? So the user experience team was being asked more to manipulate the user and to sell them more stuff, which I don't like. And the other thing was there was not a willingness to tell the truth. And this is where the technology piece came in. So I ended up getting in a fairly big argument with one of the senior engineers in the company because he was selling this fantasy so my argument was, you guys are like 8 years behind Amazon, and nobody can find stuff in your website, and you've just got to do the really hard work of like improving metadata quality and making faceted navigation search work, and you're 8 years behind, right? Like you got a lot to do. And his argument was, well, yeah, we can fix that stuff, but we're going to leapfrog Amazon, right? A couple years from now, people are going to be buying stuff using Alexa. And I was like, have you tried that? Like, when you can't see what you're talking about, you're just like, hey, Alexa, what are the options again? Not having a visual feedback makes it incredibly difficult and frustrating. And the reason I know that is we bought one of those Echoes, and it sits in our home, and we hardly ever use it, and it's kind of broken and doesn't turn the lamp on anymore. And so... But we need to push ourselves a little bit to be early adopters, to explore technology, to explore VR, augmented reality, and so forth. But be critical. Like, don't just believe the hype, right? And so, I think that there's some really fascinating contexts where VR and AR may kind of move us forward. But we also just need to be aware that there are some powerful interests selling us certain versions of the future that may not come into play.
And if as you do your UX work, you can justify as a business expense, all the really cool tech because you have to learn. I really do that, but it's pretty awesome that you get to kind of explore the new technology, and as AR, VR, or whatever kind of really is starting to evolve, and you have to try it out. You have to know what's happening. You have to know where things are going because your next job may really depend on it.
Yeah, but you do not have to be someone who learns all about AR and VR. I have been asking the same questions in my client meetings since 1996, and they still think I'm a genius, okay? The reason is because you go in and your job is to say the sky is blue, and then they go, that is an excellent point. And the sky is blue is we are users equals we are human beings, right? We are becoming semi-cyborgs, and there's all sorts of thoughts about that and everything. And there's always going to be a new technology. But it's always going to come back to, I got 2 of these, I got 2 of these, I got 1 of those, a couple of these, I got all sorted other parts and pieces, and I want and need things. Somebody living in a cave in primordial ooze was like, I need a pair of shoes. How that person got a pair of shoes was vastly different than how I selected these excellent semi-used items from eBay and got a great deal on them and free shipping. But the need was the same. So brand new crap has been coming out since before I was born, and every single time is going to change everything. Blockchain is going to change everything. It's not. It's got to be made usable for us. So yes, if your passion is developing the coolest new 360 thing that somehow magically does not make you want to puke in your pants, that's great. Go do that. But there are plenty of jobs and work to do out there I am a bizarrely conservative person at work because I'm always coming back to, does this make sense? So I just want to reassure you on that too. And that's part of the beauty of our careers is that none of this stuff phases us because we try to think about human beings, which are complicated enough.
I think it's hilarious how the question was about, is VR going to affect the office environment? And you guys are riffing all over the place, but it's awesome.
UX is about passion.
It is.
Okay, so we haven't taken a question from this side yet. Yeah.
Hey, I didn't think I'd actually get called on, so it was exciting. So I guess my main question and the main thing I've come across is just sort of that a lot of times UX is held responsible for things that really are not necessarily our fault. And so I've been really focusing on developing the interpersonal skills and the personal growth and just sort of learning that. So I'm wondering if you have any certain things that really helped you develop yourselves in the process of pushing back a lot.
Guys, why are you always looking at me?
You're a leader, Dan.
Can you give me an example of what you're talking about? Mostly, Corey told me he needed to exercise.
Let me hide my badge. Yeah, I guess just sort of if the entire sort of development process and a lot of the issues that come across when it's immature UX at enterprise, and so sort of like the organizational issues where UX is the tangible item, and so even if the issue is inherited, that it's UX can kind of get blamed for it, even if your sort of the process isn't aligned. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
I feel like
Basically, UXers get the blame for everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Is that it?
I think that's sort of the unwritten thing that I love to spin positively that people don't really tell people when they get into UX.
In a way, though, we aren't really held accountable for anything. Like, if you look at all the shit that's gone down this past year that has been caused by UXers filter bubbles and trolling and, fake news and all. I mean, we're somewhat responsible
Missile warnings.
we're somewhat responsible for all that, and we have not really gotten the blame until maybe the last, couple weeks or so, and even then, it's kind of pinned off on the executives. So, I don't know. I guess you could just keep going with that, and it's like, hey, you guys, now you've got your culture of regret, and you're like, yeah, I'm really sorry that I was so bad that I created the addictive Facebook feed that, and now we're gonna do only meaningful interactions, whatever that means. Figure it out, UXers. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something here.
I thought I was going to a dark place.
I'm writing a book on happiness, people.
I think it's a tough situation, right? And I think if you're in a culture of finger pointing and blaming, then there's a kind of corporate cultural issue there that's not on you, right? I mean, I think step one is draw your boundaries, right? It is not on you to fix culture problems. So step two is lead by example, right? Is say, okay, how should we do this differently next time, right? And put it on us to do differently next time. The moment you get defensive is the moment you confirm their worst suspicions, right? Which is not cool. I think one of the things that designers hopefully can bring to the table is this idea of critique is water off a duck's back, right? You thrive on feedback, right? As poorly as that feedback might be constructed, at the core of it is still feedback, whatever the packaging might look like. And if the packaging is, this is all your fault, you need to go, okay, something broke down, and let's try and fix it or understand it so we can learn from it, right? But I think that step one of draw your boundaries is really important.
Yeah, I agree, Dan. One of the things I was going to say, Tamara, you brought up, grow something 20%. Well, as UX professionals, we don't always get the chance to do the marketing and decide how a product is positioned in a market or where it's sold or, sort of. So I think I'm always talking to clients and customers about that. What are we affecting? What are our goals with what we're going to be able to affect? And I think that's maybe one way to do that, to answer your question, is it is about deciding where those boundaries are and being able to work inside of those things.
I mean, one thing I'll add, have you heard of E&O insurance? Does that mean anything to you guys? No. Errors and omissions. And I always thought myself kind of as a conservative business person, I'm like, I'm going to carry errors and omissions insurance should someone sue me for making a bad recommendation, which thank goodness no one ever has. But just this month, I found a client, and they said, oh, to work with us, you need an E&O policy. I said, fine, I've got a policy today. Oh, your limit's not big enough. We need you to have a bigger limit for your E&O policy to work with us. It's like, what? But I think it is real. I mean, it is real that you have to be cautious about you make your recommendations, but provide the caveats too, and say, okay, here's my recommendation. These are the limitations of my knowledge. These are the inputs. These are the inputs I never had, and I had to take my best guess. Because I think as good business people, back to business sense, we do have to kind of to honestly and appropriately provide parameters around the designs we create, around the recommendations that we give.
I actually think that's kind of where we're heading in a lot of ways. I mean, architects are licensed, lawyers are licensed, doctors. We may be headed in that direction as designers. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, that's been something, it's the topic has come up again recently, but it's been around for years, this idea that we need to have some kind of licensing, we need to have some kind of continuing education and certification to practice. And I think it will become more and more evident that that's probably where we're going to need to go as we touch more lives and we get more personal. We're getting closer to the essence of people in the kind of data that we use as raw material for our design, the way that we're managing people's profiles and what we're doing with that information. It is pretty sensitive, and we probably will come to that point where we will have to have some kind of, I don't know, some kind of professional licensing practice around that. And who knows, maybe we'll have to carry malpractice insurance, just like a lot of other professionals do.
And I just make a real quick point, which is I think that there's real value in becoming more mindful and more curious about fear, right? And sort of asking, when you start to be afraid of something happening, you're going to get blamed for something, to sort of ask the question like, well, what am I really afraid of? What's the worst that's going to happen? And often you realize, like, maybe in one context, the worst that's going to happen is I'm going to get yelled at, or I'm going to be unfairly blamed, and then we're going to move on. Of course, you want to, you want to sort of state your case and explain, and not, you don't want to be unfairly blamed unnecessarily. But, I think we avoid a lot of stuff in both at work and in life because of fear. And there's a lot of value in exploring our fears. I think that the two most valuable ways to think about fear, one is to kind of build your curiosity and to sort of notice fear and ask why, what am I afraid of? And the other is to try to build a sense of adventure, right? Like, instead of looking at this as just a bad, scary thing, to be like, hey, this is kind of like a roller coaster ride, and to try to, maybe even have a little bit of fun with the excitement that fear brings into the room.
I love the roller coaster analogy. A career as a roller coaster is a pretty awesome career. One more question. We haven't had anyone from this final section over here, but no one's actually raising their hand. So, no, well, it was the far left section. We had this section, that section. Nobody from this last section. Okay, wait, yeah, over there, yeah. Yes, yeah, you, blue, yeah. Go on.
Oh, I don't know if I want to end on ethics, but in some ways, Pamela, let's go there. I mean, I think there's an empowering idea to think that the coarsening of our discourse and incivility is really just a UX design flaw. The empowering idea is that, could we do anything to design it into a better place? And I want to ask that question. I've been wanting to ask that question for a long time. Is there something constructive, proactive that we could do, rather than say, oh, we made a mess, and now what are we going to do?
You may not get the opportunity to do so, but if you have the opportunity to do so, yes, right? I mean, I'm not a designer at Facebook or any other social media platform, thank God. But if I were, I would take it upon myself to think very carefully about that. I get to work on interesting, complicated design problems that none of you will ever use because you're not in my user base. But I wanted to think about that at a micro scale for those target audiences. So I think it's hard to say the onus is on UX to fix the world's problems. But I do think when we are given an opportunity, we should freaking take it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. But I think it's three factors. I mean, I think it's looking at companies changing what they measure. So they're not just measuring profit. There's a tradition already of triple bottom line: people, profits, and purpose. That's B Corps. They're probably going to lead the way on ethics. As far as that component is concerned, I think ground level designers can have an impact on ethics, and we need to take as a baseline, do no harm. But I think we need to start having more discussions about what happens after that. I'm on a huge international committee with the IEEE, which is an international association of engineers, and they want to bring in more designers to this conversation, where they're trying to make a standard for ethics, and what we're looking at is well-being measures that countries and cities are using as a foundation for that. So I think there'll be tools for designers and developers and engineers to draw on. And then, of course, the third factor is individuals, right? We don't even have norms around technology use because things are changing so quickly. So as a parent, I don't really know what the right thing is to do, and I change every freaking day what my policies are. Oh, I just canceled Netflix, which sucks for me, but it's really great for my 9-year-old who can't stop playing the next video and the next video and the next video, even though there's tons of interesting things to do and all kinds of stuff. And there's not accepted norms or standards or conventions around that. And that's part me, and that's part design, and that's part the company goals. It's all three of those things.
So I made a bit of a joke at the beginning saying I'm not entirely convinced that I have a UX career. But the serious thing I'm getting at with that is that framing is really important, right? Framing is how we, not only how we explain things to others, but how we understand it for ourselves. And I think we all need to be very mindful of the different ways in which we're framing what we do, who we are, and be flexible with that. And so on the one hand, I think there's real value in asking the question of, can we use user experience to make the world a better place? But I also personally find it very freeing and empowering to say, how might I make the world a better place completely independent of the various ways that I have framed myself? And so, there may be more powerful things that any one of us in this room can do to, improve the organizations in which we work or the communities in which we live. The insight might come from freeing yourself from the way that you're framing things, even though then later on you might realize that there's some great user experience methods or practices that you can bring into play.
Or better fonts everywhere. That's a major problem.
Okay, so I want to thank our amazing panel today, who have hopefully given you some insights, things that you can take home, things that you can, food for thought as you progress along your own UX careers. And we're done. Thank you.